This episode of Behind the Regs is sponsored by Plan Checker. Plan Checker is a UK-based digital platform designed to connect clients with verified building control and construction professionals, making it easier to find the right expertise at the right time for the right job. It doesn't replace building control bodies, and it doesn't carry out restricted activities or functions. It simply creates clearer, more transparent access to the professionals working across the industry. If you're a professional, a client, or part of the wider built environment sector, you can learn more or sign up at planchecker.co.uk. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Behind the Regs, hosted by myself, Nader, and my co-host, Jack. Today, we have Paul Tomkies. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today. Before we get into the details, can you please give us and the listeners a short introduction about yourself, your background, and how you became involved in the building control recruitment world?
Of course. So yes, I'm Paul Tomkies, founding director with my wife Katie, and owner of BRG, a building control recruitment. BRG is almost 18 years old. I've worked in building control recruitment for nearly 25 years, and like many people who got into building control, I actually fell into recruitment during university. So initially worked for Hayes Montrose as they were then from 2002, moved to a company called Oyster Partnership in 2000. At the start of the 2008 recession, left that company and set up BRG a few months later. Like I say, I've worked in building control recruitment for well over half my life. So although I'm not a technical building control surveyor or a surveyor at all, but obviously feel very ingrained in the industry and the people I've dealt with over the last 2 decades or so. But yeah, we've recently diversified into other niche areas such as BRPD, building safety, fire safety, fire engineering, very much off the back of building control, which of course is our own little niche. So yeah, that's sort of my potted history, really.
Wow, brilliant. Thank you, Paul. That's your history in a nutshell. That was quite interesting to hear. Right. Well, I'm going to start off by a few questions, and I'm sure that you will give us most of the answers that obviously our listeners and ourselves will be looking for. But let's start with the foundation. Why should companies use agencies? What's the real value you believe you bring in this sector as a recruitment agency?
Okay, well, I think the first and foremost thing I would say is not every company should use recruitment agencies.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
as I always said to my clients, I'm really here as a last resort. I've obviously run a company and various other companies over the last 10 to 15 years, and if I was in their shoes, I would obviously do all I could to find staff myself, whether it be my own networks, direct contact, word of mouth, advertisements. But like I say, I think the value comes with recruitment agencies in niche sectors, hard to fill jobs. On occasions, if you need a specific hire very, very quickly, or if you need quite a few hires in a short space of time. There's also internal time constraints, I think, with a lot of companies. Obviously been a shift over the last number of years, and I completely get it, of companies having or using their HR staff to go out and network and find people. And it does bring success, but obviously it doesn't always bring success. The network itself or coverage can be quite limited. So when you are sort of looking to use a recruitment agency, and obviously, recruitment agencies, good, bad, big, small, a whole multitude, just like RBCAs and councils. No two companies or councils are the same. I think it's exactly the same with recruitment agencies. But ultimately, if you've got access quickly to a large market, or pretty much all of the market that could be accessed to recruit people you need, that's where I see the real added value. And that does save time. And as we know, time is money, especially in our sector where there are some companies having to turn work away because they just can't service it.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. Yeah. So what would you say are the biggest misconceptions that employers or candidates have about the recruitment industry? in your experience? Obviously, you've been in the industry for quite a while.
Hmm.
25 years is not a small number.
No,
It's a
sure.
silver jubilee, that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, like I say, it's like everything in life. You come across good things and bad things, and there are some really good agencies out there. I'd like to think that our agency BRG is one of them in our little sector. But obviously, in the same way, like I said earlier, with councils and RBCAs, you come across some good ones, you come across some bad ones. People can get once bitten, twice shy, and I completely understand. I think the biggest misconception, well, one of the biggest misconceptions about agencies is that we are, or particularly some agencies are all just about making money. Of course, we're a business. We're not obviously a charity, of course. In the same way that private RBCAs are there to make money.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, from our perspective, I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed in my years, and I completely fell into recruitment. I didn't know what recruitment was when I first started at Hayes. I had no idea how they made their money. I had no idea what margins were for temporary staff. I had no idea what perm fees. I didn't know where the money came from to recruit perms. I was so wet behind the ears, Nader, it was untrue. But what I've always cared about is helping people where I can. And in this case, with recruitment, the byproduct of being successful in that sector is you're able to build a business and make money. But I do enjoy helping people. I take a lot of pride in a lot of graduates and trainees I placed 20 years ago, who are now directors, or have got their own firms, or leading councils as building control managers or heads of building control. That really makes me happy, and gives me a sense of pride and a sense of like what I'd like to think as sort of added value. I think that's one of the things as well with any business. If you can be seen to add value to another business or entity, it's probably worth a conversation about whether you can work together, or whether indeed that service or product is worth paying for. But yeah, I do, and Katie certainly. We're very empathetic people. We've got good morals, good ethics. We like helping people. Obviously, you can't help everyone. Some people, don't want to be helped, and we understand. But if we can aid people in building control, we're helping people with our own business, the people that we employ, friends, family, acquaintances. We're giving them careers and a career path to be successful themselves. And it's lovely to be able to do that for people. And Kate and I are very lucky that, we have that trust, repaid, repaid by people. I think with candidates, I don't think, there are many misconceptions I sort of have seen over the years from candidates. I mean, some candidates don't understand how an agency would work, particularly those, for example, who transfer from, say, permanent employment and then go into the contract market. So there's a bit of guidance needed there. But, again, it's relatively simplistic in terms of explaining how it works and what they need to do. But I think, like I say, and you guys, no doubt, and the industry as a whole, no doubt, have seen going into, permanent recruitment, and then people moving from a permanent job to a temporary position. There's been a great deal of that in the last 12 months. And that has taken me somewhat by surprise, to be honest, because I've never seen such
Shift.
No, absolutely right. Never seen a shift like that in all my years.
We will touch on that later. We got a question to touch on that, and we would want to expand on that further. Before we go into the topic of shifting between permanent and contracting, do you think recruitment has become harder now since the new regulation, new competency requirement, or do you think it has maybe streamlined things a little bit?
I would say it's made the process of recruitment harder, because we have now got a classification system from class 1 to class 3H, and anyone who's not got anywhere near that, unfortunately, will not get anywhere near the building control market. So that has obviously thinned out even more candidates from what was already a tiny pool of people that we could speak with, or in essence, the RBCAs and councils could employ. I think over the last 2 years, since the changes of the BSR, people have cottoned on recruitment agencies, and obviously employers as well, councils, that, there is a staff shortage. It's been amplified with the BSR changes, and that in essence, there is money to be made by finding people. And I get that. So we've seen competition increase as a result of that. But again, over the last 25 years, I've seen agencies come and go. BRG, we started from scratch. 2008 started from scratch when I was at Oyster. Hayes had an established desk, but they weren't market leaders. And I went to Oyster, started from scratch, turned them into market leaders, and then did the same with ourselves. Kate and I with BRG. Obviously, there's a lot of hard work, and it took time, but we've always done things for the long-term future. We've looked to establish relationships for repeat business. A director and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago saying, Paul, how many candidates have come to you over the years repeatedly for jobs, and how many jobs have you found them? And, Charlotte, who now works for us, was a building control surveyor herself for nearly 20 years, and she worked a contract. I must have found her up with over a dozen contracts. But in terms of recruitment, the processes itself haven't really changed, but they will change very quickly in the coming years.
So with staffing levels, do you think there is a skills shortage, or do you think it's the way some building control bodies are structured and how they actually run the building control sector? Because obviously there's lots of different inspections. Could they be done differently? Could they be done remotely? So is it a shortage, or are they just not utilising the current staff correctly?
Okay, well, first of all, there definitely is a shortage. There's a shortage 20 years ago, but you are right. There are efficiencies, but there are no doubt efficiencies that could be introduced into people's working lives that would help reduce issues. But at the same time, we're all human. There's only so many hours in the day, and one of the big bugbears that a lot of people come to me have is travel. So it's not just a case of actually going out and do the inspections, it's a case of actually getting there. The number of people I speak to who work long hours in terms of evenings and weekends, and these, again, we'll probably touch on it later on in terms of the age demographic, but a lot of these people have got kids. A lot of these people have got elderly relatives they might look after, and they're still putting in the hours to not just get ahead, they're putting in the hours to stay afloat for Monday. So I would say that if there were efficiencies to be made, most companies would have definitely looked into them. I'd say most councils have probably looked into them, but within LABC, there is a definite shortage. And that basically has led to, and always has led to, the contract market. I've placed contractors for nearly 25 years. There's always been a need for contractors all across the country. But in the last 2 weeks alone, my colleague Michael, he's had upwards of 8 or 9 vacancies, immediate vacancies called in from councils who need the staff. Now, that might be linked potentially to the Ascent reversions, but to be completely honest, these councils in particular have been stretched for years, and they're working off skeleton staff. And the reason for this is that there hasn't been any investment. It has been difficult for councils to invest. When I was at Hayes, 2004, we ran a graduate scheme with the LDSA, the London District Surveyors Association. It was really successful. Pretty much every council within the LDSA, of which I think there were 32, 33, took on a graduate. And that was amazing. And the managers were all behind it. And that's what gave it the traction. But a year later, most of the councils weren't getting the backing further up the tree in terms of the executive structure because of finance. So that basically ended up being postponed and then completely torpedoed. And back then, we're talking 20 years ago, that's when we were trying to inject new people, trainees, into the sector for succession planning. But obviously it was far easier back then because obviously pretty much anyone could come into building control and be put on a career path towards chartership, whether it be with the RACS or the ABE. At the time, the RACS was the preferred option until they sort of lost the appetite for being involved in building control. But no, there has always been a staff shortage. I do understand where people who say there aren't staff shortages. I can understand where they're coming from. I really do. And to be fair, they are right in that particular part of what they're talking about. But what I would say is that there are dozens of RBCAs that have grown successfully and operated in the manner that they do now, providing a service which does go above and beyond what's probably stated in the legislation of what should be provided. And that was one of the big bugbears when the BSR came around, is that a lot of people felt that they would not be legally able to provide design advice. Obviously, the legislation, as I've read it and as I've been told, has stipulated over the years that shouldn't have been the case anyway. But as the role of building control surveying or building control officers back in the day, when there was a clear distinction, as that role's evolved and companies have tried to provide a value added service to their clients to win business or to retain business, the legislation, what's basically been outlined, has just over the years just been sort of forgotten. But obviously, you forget some very successful businesses have been born out of what you guys do and what you guys provide. Local authorities, obviously different. They basically are, in most cases, a supplemented service. But over the years, again, many have not been able to put the money back into their departments that they have earned through fees. Sorry, it's been hived off into a central pot, and that's again over the years. The managers I've spoken to have said it's just not fair, Paul. We are putting a shift in here. We're one of the only departments in the council, if not the only, depending on which council, who actually make any money, and we need to reinvest it. But we're getting chipped away with austerity, chipped away with budgets. And that's why you see now so many relying on contractors to get the work done, which legally they, in most cases, have to accept.
Where do you envision the new building control staff will come from? Do you think it's going to be universities, schools, or we spoke to a service leaver in one of our podcasts, which will be coming out hopefully in the next few weeks. But if there is such a big gap, where are we going to find all these people? Because building control really isn't marketed out there. It's not really a big awareness of the industry or how to get involved in the industry.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this is one thing that I've tried to push over the years. And again, this is where I feel that, my role at BRG and my vested interest in the sector, because in essence, building control recruitment has been my livelihood. It's pretty much all I've ever done. And I do like giving back to anyone that I can do. So I spent a lot of time mapping the entirety of the UK university sector. For any university that had a building surveying or building control degree, I think over the years there's probably been about three or four universities that had building control degree: Westminster, London South Bank, Wolverhampton, and I think it might just be Wolverhampton now that offer it. So, like you say, Jack, building control has just been a poor relation of pretty much anything in construction, certainly in comparison to planning. But I mapped the entirety of the university sector with every single course leader and careers office and said to my clients, look, if you want graduates, I can get you building surveying graduates if you wish. I said it to the councils and I said it to AIs, as obviously they were known back then. But ultimately, there was just no take up. So what I would say is that this information, I've updated it over the years. So this information is out there. We can tap into these people very, very easily. And these are people actually that want to, as you expect, spend 3 years doing a building surveying degree. They're probably going to do something in surveying if they can. But you are right, building control is barely mentioned. I mean, building control, I think for most building surveying graduates, is maybe a module during a semester. That's it. But ultimately, there are people out there in our sector, business leaders, directors, building control managers, who love this sector, myself included, love this sector, feel passionate about it, and want the very best for it. So the information is there to be used. We're ready to go, but it's just that word appetite. I don't think people at the moment have got that appetite. And I think, I can't remember who said it, but anyone, and you've got to basically experience a certain level of pain before people make a change. And I think, we're approaching that level of pain. And I think 2028 will be the pain threshold. We'll probably get into that in a minute about what's going to happen after re-registration. But, I think when people feel the pain, that's when they basically will go, right, we need to change. But I do fear we are past that critical part now. I mean, like you say, service leaders, people from, the army and other armed forces, it's a great avenue. What the LABC trainee scheme has shown everyone is that you can get people very, very quickly from a whole multitude of different backgrounds and somewhat make a success of it. Obviously, you're going to get people who fall out, people who don't enjoy the job. But again, when people say, is there a staff shortage? And I would say, yes, because where are most of these LABC trainees ending up? In the private sector, because they pay more money. Simple as that. The local authority saying, well, we're spending all this time and all this money training people up. And within 2 or 3 years, they're out of their golden handshake period with having to pay back their university or course fees. And we've lost them. And that's our succession planning back to sort of square one. Don't get me wrong, that's always happened. There's always been movement in the building control market, nowhere near as much as it is now. To people come into the sector, Jack, it's difficult because who at the moment has got the time to take on a class 1 and train them, mentor them, and bring them through? You had Neil Badley from Swaco on recently, and Neil, what a guy, living embodiment of what building control is, and an amazing guy. But he's not going to be here forever, and they got to be looking at who's going to be the next cohort of Neil Badleys, who's going to be the next cohort of Nader Hassan's. Obviously, it's like you got yourself there, Jack. You're relatively young in the building control sector. You're dragging the average age down. But the Chris Vaughns, the John Palmers, the other directors. Where are the next cohort coming from? Who's got the appetite and the ambition to get there? Who wants to stress? So I think, like I say, I would always say surveying graduates are a standout choice to go and target. And there are plenty of them. But again, once you've got them through the door, you've got to support them. And it's one thing getting your class 2A plus after 12 to 18 months, but what about the experience? What about the knowledge going out on site? And we've always said, 5 to 10 years is when you can sort of really sort of say, yeah, I'm probably a half decent building control surveyor now. Anything before that, you probably think, I've still got a lot to learn. Or you should be thinking, I've still got a lot to learn. One of the things that Charlotte and I are very, very hot on here, and again, take a lot of satisfaction from, are getting class 1's jobs. I love it because you are just genuinely giving people a chance in our sector, and they thank us for it. And it's like, that makes everything worthwhile. And to be fair, there are some RBCAs out there and councils who are taking the steps to get class 1's on board and make a real go of it and actually give them the support that they need. And they will benefit from it because they will have people that will be loyal to those companies because they have taken the chance and the time and the effort to give them a step into the sector and give them a career. And that is brilliant. But most of our inquiries are, Paul, to be fair, you're sending me these class 1's and I know why you're doing it because you want to help these people, but we need 2A or above. Or at the moment, for a lot of RBCAs, 2D and above. And brilliant, of course, we'll try and find them, but the pool is shrinking.
It's a shame, really. It's a shame because it wasn't the case before.
It wasn't.
The classes has put a hiccup.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of frustration about the BSR, and I get it. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and no doubt they would have handled a lot of things differently with the benefit of hindsight. But you can say about most things in life, and there are councils, RBCAs, RBIs that have made errors, myself included. We're human. We make mistakes, and hindsight's a wonderful thing. But as long as you learn from those mistakes, then you can take something from it. But I think the 2004 situation with registration, it just kicked so many people out of our sector who, some didn't really need an excuse. Some retired and said, this is the best time to retire. So I'm out. There are plenty that I know, though. There are plenty that took the time and effort to go through the process and failed. And there are still some people I know that have tried 2 or 3 times and are still failing. But they're desperate to work in the sector. They just need an arm around the shoulder to see them through. But I think if you're happy to go on to talk about re-registration now, I'm not entirely sure if you want to, but in a couple of years' time.
Well, it's going to be coming up at some point, isn't it? So
fair enough.
In my view, I think in re-registration, when it's going to happen, it's going to be a disaster because everybody's going to be trying to do the exact same thing unless they've already done a competency upgrade and that extends further on. It's just going to be everyone rushing in to try and do the same process again. Why it wasn't staggered in the first place, I really just don't know.
No, again, it's a hindsight thing, I think, Jack. I think anyone who is in the position where they want to re-register or upgrade sort of now with the support of an employer is probably worth thinking about seriously, because it will save a lot of time and effort and potential grief in a couple of years' time, because we saw people rushing. I spoke to dozens of people who didn't even think it was going to happen. They said, no, it'll be delayed, or it'll be pushed back to October. And to be fair, there was a pushback of 6 months because obviously everyone left it to last minute, and people were like, whoa, we've not got enough people at class 2A or above. And how does this supervision thing work? Because again, so much introduced was left up to interpretation. And that was as a company owner, as a building control manager in a local authority, that's an absolute nightmare. Don't let me interpret it. Just please tell me in black and white exactly what you want me to do. So, we have people last year coming to us saying, okay, well, I've not, building control managers, I've not got my levels, but so can I hire a temp who's, say, class 3, and he can or she can sign off all our work remotely? That's how we are basically interpreting supervision. There was a council who I think had 5 or 6 employees. I think the manager might have been 2D, for example. Everyone else was class 1. And those 5 class 1 RBIs were going out on site, doing their normal job, and then he was signing off everything. And I'm like, the liability on that is just insane. If it is to be interpreted that if anything goes wrong, that individual RBI will be held liable. And, we talk about people coming into the sector and leaving the sector. If this liability is 10 years, we're talking about people who might retire in their late 60s or early 70s who could, in effect, be hauled into court in their late 70s or early 80s. And I don't think many people would have
I don't think many people would be fond of that.
not to be fond of it. And you also have people that, regrettably, will be in a situation go, well, I can't remember that project. Going so far back now, I dealt with a lot of projects. I think a lot of people in building Shoal now, in terms of the sort of quality of their working life, they want as fewer projects to be fewer live projects. I'm still hearing about people that have got many, many, many hundreds of live projects. And then we go back to about, workload efficiency. Is there a staffing problem because people aren't basically working as efficiently or effectively?
This episode is sponsored by Plan Checker. Across building control and the wider construction sector, one issue keeps coming up: capacity. The work is there, the responsibility is huge, and the pressure keeps increasing. Plan Checker was built to help bridge that gap by making it easier to access independent, appropriately qualified professionals when support is genuinely needed. Whether that's for plan reviews, consultancy input, or specialist advice. It doesn't change statutory responsibility, and it doesn't interfere with regulatory routes. It simply helps people find expertise without relying on informal networks or last-minute phone calls. If you want to see how that works in practice, visit planchecker.co.uk. Can I go back to the classes? Is the class of registration now, like anything B and above, is it now more important than having a professional registration with an association like MK, bar ICS? Is that now more important for the employer? Like, could candidates get permanent or contract work just because having the right class, but not being because it's associated with these professional association memberships. We don't know if that is important now, because you would obviously know, because you're the one speaking to employers.
Sure.
If that is no longer important to employers, and the most important thing is what class they are, then do you think candidates should keep their association registration with the professional associations, or do you think that's not as important as it was before?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think there's value. If you're, let's face it, prior to 2024, you were basically judged on whether you were chartered building control surveyor or non-chartered. And then basically, if you got chartered, you'd see a hike in your salary, you see a hike in your responsibilities, because ultimately the clients or the councils could, in essence, charge out a higher fee to their clients because you're chartered. But that process to become chartered is, in my opinion, very, very valuable. It makes, and it's not just from experience of talking to people, but it's also sort of seeing people, but it makes you a far more rounded and better surveyor going through that process, because it is tough. I've not had a single client come to me saying, Paul, we'd like this candidate to be a class 2D and MCABE. No clients have come to me. I dread to think how much money the ABE have lost in terms of subscriptions since then, because also a lot of people are going, rightly so, thinking, I've worked really long and hard to get my MCABE or even my ACABE, and I'm now being told it's not relevant to our sector. And I completely understand that. I've had multiple conversations with people saying, Paul, what should I do? I'm paying X £100 a year for this. I think it's important, but do employers think it's important? And I've got to be honest and say, no one's asking for me for MCABE now or RICS surveyors. It's all about the levels. It's just now become so clear cut with the levels. And that has also had an effect on salary bandings and gradings, and people becoming more aware of their own personal worth in terms of salaries in the market, which I'm sure we'll go on to in a minute, in terms of finance.
With the values, what are people worth these days? We see contracts where some of them are astronomical figures for people. But then you're thinking, how could some companies be offering put out for a 2A surveyor at £130 an hour or something along those lines? You're thinking, is that not going to be detrimental to like a local authority in the long run paying someone that amount of money?
Yeah, I mean, I've not seen 2As at that level. Seen 3Hs at that level for definite. Because again, going back to the original question about why should employers use agencies and the resistance there, and also the perception of agencies, particularly from employers, is the agencies want to drive up salaries to earn more money, and that is a fair point. There are companies, not in building control. I'm not seeing in building control, but there will be sectors out there where recruitment agencies are motivated to push up salaries, and in most cases unjustly. But again, what I've learned over the years is that employers, people aren't silly. If they can see, for example, me trying to push a 2A at 80k, they're like, Paul, are you okay? Are you okay? Because they're not worth that in the current market. But the important thing I think people need to realize is that salaries have increased primarily because of the contract market. And the contract market is driven by LABC. So ultimately, because of the chronic disparity between supply and demand, whether it's building control, whether it's fire engineering, whether it's IT, banking, finance, teachers, when there's supply and demand issues, you're going to find that the candidates hold the majority, if not all, of the cards. And within reason, they can ask for what they want. But again, people aren't silly. People have got an idea of what they are worth. And in the vast majority of cases, people are sensible in terms of their expectations. And that's one thing where we add value. We manage people's expectations. If someone comes to us as a 2B, for example, and says, I want 80k, the immediate retort is, well, I appreciate where you're coming from, but in the current climate, you're not worth anywhere near that to the vast majority, if not all of our clients. So expectation management and being realistic and honest is important. But the contract market is driving up everything. It's a nightmare for councils. It's a nightmare for business owners. And along with, as discussed earlier, increases to national insurance tax, taxation, corporation tax, costs of energy costings, everything is going up. And as a business owner, everything is squeezed on the bottom line. So I do understand when I hear directors and I speak to them saying, Paul, these salaries, they're unsustainable. What's going on? And I say, I know where you're coming from. I do understand where you're coming from. The contract market is driving it up. But I think one point that is very much overlooked and sometimes I think forgotten, and this comes obviously with age, having done it such a long time, but you guys have been chronically underpaid for such a long time. The value.
That was coming next. Though.
Yeah. Honestly. And I, 10 years ago, 45K for a chartered building control surveyor with 10 plus years experience was the going rate. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but that's cheap. Even back in 2015, that's cheap. So I think a lot of companies were getting a lot of value from their employees. And obviously back then, the margins would have been bigger. Companies in general would have been probably making more money and making it easier because obviously there are more staff. But, I was flicking for that RICS journal earlier, and that's 17 years old. And there are chartered building control surveying jobs in that journal for 27K, albeit with councils, but 27K in 2008 for a chartered building control surveyor. I mean, I'd say it's underpaid, but this is the thing as well, because the councils are unable in most cases to recruit permanent staff because their salaries are benchmarked against planning. And in some cases, environmental services, it's not easy for the manager to say, look, we're behind the curve here. We cannot attract anyone permanently. So can we look up in the salaries? Even with agreement, those processes in councils can take anything between 3 to 12 months. And by that time, the market has moved on again, particularly in our little niche. So what's the angle for councils? We need staff now. Agency, in most cases, comes from a different pot of finance within the council, generally a central pot, an emergency pot. And within reason, those councils can pay what they need to, or if needed, above the odds to secure people. But I think, with a lot of discussions, particularly on LinkedIn and just in general about our industry, I do think LABC is forgotten. Obviously, a lot of the comments we see on LinkedIn, a lot of the discussions is primarily around the private sector and business owners. Like, I completely get it. But within the LABC sector, that is its own little niche sector itself, and they have got their own problems. They operate in a different way to the private RBCAs. They've got a whole different array of constraints, and a lot of building control managers don't have the authority to make the decisions they need to. A lot of building control managers aren't even for a building control background. A lot of them are planners because the councils.
Because it's public money.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. It's public money. You have to justify where it's being spent.
Absolutely right. And we know, that there's wastage in terms of finance in the public sector, and there's wastage in the private sector. But obviously in the private sector, it's not as prevalent, because obviously if a private sector business is wasteful of money, their business won't be particularly successful, or it'll close. But there are lots of building control managers within LABC who are under an incredible amount of pressure, and I know a lot of them feel forgotten. Because that is not really publicized. A lot of them are very frustrated, don't always feel particularly well represented, and a lot of them are ready to jack it in.
So would you say, in simple words, their hands are tied?
Yeah, in most cases. So they're just thinking, look, I'm in a bad situation here. I'm getting no help at all. So if I do have finance available to get a temp or two in to help me and my department and my colleagues and improve the place, then again, within reason, I will pay that money to bring these people in. But ultimately, like I said to you earlier, we've now seen a huge shift of permanent people saying, I'm going to go into contracting because I know that there is a national shortage of building control surveyors.
Do you think that shift is sustainable though, Paul?
I think it will just depend on how much money in the public purse is seen, but also the role of building control, because obviously within local authority building control, it's a statutory service. So it's a legal requirement. So they have to provide it. If they can't
Yes.
provide it, they go into special measures or they're investigated. Also, the BSR now, breathing down people's necks and auditing. They have to be seen to be able to provide a service. So I would say in building control terms, that money will continue.
Do you think local authority and the private sector could be collaborating better when it comes to the workforce development? Do you think there's some opportunities where secondment could be put in place at different areas? So if there's the local authorities really struggling and RBCAs have surplus of staff, could they maybe have consultant work put through, or is there any way that could work in the future?
I mean, they obviously could collaborate better, but it's whether the councils would have the ability to do that from a corporate level. But I think the big resistance would be, would the councils want to? Because although relations have thawed over the years between LABC and the private sector, there still is a lot of resistance from within LABC about the private sector. And there are a lot of people who have got long memories and don't, a lot of these councils have lost their staff to the private sector. And I think a lot of managers will say, I think it will be quite cheeky if said RBCA, who have taken a lot of my staff, would then come to me saying, do you want me to sort of help you with the excessive workload that you've got? There still is us and them culture in some councils, the dark side and the light side being the old cliche that was used for many, many years.
Still is.
It's probably, yeah, I was going to say you probably hear it more than I do, but I think a lot of people sort of just like joke about it now, but 20 years ago it was serious. A lot of people despised AIs in the public sector. There was genuine dislike for certain AIs who had either decimated staff or were undercutting the council on fees. But the appetite, particularly from corporate or executive management, on wanting to give council work to the private sector, I don't think it would sit well with many people. That's my view and the view of people I've spoken to over the years.
Yeah, I can see why some may not like it, but when they don't have the staff, what are you going to do?
I agree. I mean, obviously, there is the use of agency staff when they're available. And to be fair, there are many available. There's more agency staff available now than ever, because obviously a lot of people now are able to make that transition because of the security. Whereas this time 10 years ago, it was a 3-month contract here or a 3-month contract there. Your council saying, look, we're going to need you definitely for 12 months. And to be fair, without counting chickens, there's probably a job for life here as a temp. I've got temporary staff working and who've worked with us for over 15 years. They've been employed on and off by the same employer for that time, and they will be there until they decide to call it a day. So there is security there now.
Paul, where do you see the future of recruitment? Do you think that traditional ways will remain, or do you think there will be more adaptation to AI, digital platforms, and things that can adapt to the changes, not just in the industry, to the world around us?
Well, there's going to be a lot of change very, very quickly in our world, the whole world, in a very, very short space of time. And a lot of people just either aren't aware of it and certainly not geared up for it. I mean, in recruitment terms, the initial advent of AI will help streamline sort of administration tasks and quite time-heavy tasks. And that's the same with building control. I think, the companies and the councils that embrace AI quicker, they will succeed quicker, but that will come with job losses. I listen and read a lot about this sort of stuff, and it is likely worldwide we will see millions and millions and millions of job losses, particularly in the more labour-intensive professions. There are AI. There's AI out there that can lay 3,000 bricks a day. So bricklayers potentially in our little world of construction are potentially at risk. We're going to see an exponential boom in AI in the next 5-10 years, which will be the biggest change the world's ever seen. In terms of recruitment, people who are successful are personable. They're trustworthy. They're empathetic. They last the test of time. But ultimately, recruitment will become more professional and personable. But in terms of building control, I think we will see AI brought into most councils and companies within the next 5 years. It will have to, because they'll just get left behind, and that will lead to much more efficient systems. There probably will be job losses around administration and technical support, but I think the highly skilled market, there'll still be a requirement, obviously, for RBIs, building control surveyors, to perform the highly skilled areas. But again, in terms of technical knowledge and such like, gone will be the days of having to read through the regulations to find an answer. It will be with you in seconds. But yeah, it's going to be difficult for a lot of people, and I do worry for a lot of people. And all we can do is just do our best and just adopt it, I think, and just realize it's coming, and it's here, and it's going to stay, and it's going to evolve very, very quickly.
For anyone looking at changing careers, not changing careers, looking for a position in the market, permanent contract or independent, with your advice, which do you think is the best position to be in?
If someone comes to me who's permanently employed and says, Paul, or against contracting, myself and Michael will sit down with them and have a very honest conversation and say, look, on the outside, it's very attractive, and in most cases, you're going to be absolutely fine. You'll always have us. I always have people's backs, and if you ever come out of contract work, we will do our utmost to make sure you're never out of work ever. And I think that's why we've had so many people that have worked with us for years, because they just know that if anything goes wrong, we're in the phone. If a contract comes to an end, we're going to find them. And unless basically there's just a complete blip in the market, we will find them something else to go into. But it's not for everyone. And if people have got financial commitments, mortgages, kids, elderly relatives, then we will lay it on the line to them and make it clear that this contract you're going for, it might last 6 to 12 months, brilliant. But if it comes to an end, you might have to live away from home, or there might be periods where you are unemployed. Now, if you're earning 2 to 3 times more than a permanent job doing this, then in effect you could work for a year, be unemployed for a year, and still be as well off if you were working in a permanent position, which again sounds crazy, but just shows the disparity between permanent salaries and hourly rates. But we have that honest conversation, because we just know if we don't and things go wrong, the first question would be, the first comment would be, Paul, why weren't you honest would be about this? Why? I know plenty of people, family, friends, building control surveyors, who leave the house at 6 a.m. before they see their kids, get home 7, 8 o'clock at night, and don't see their kids because they're in bed. And at that time, you can't buy that time, and you can't put a price on that.
Paul, thank you for coming on today. It's been an eye-opener to hear some of your thoughts on the industry and get your perspective on recruitment.
Well.
Nader, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think it was very insightful. Thank you very much, Paul, for information. And obviously your opinion is it's very interesting. I think thank you for sharing it so openly as well. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you, Paul.
No, you're more than welcome. And, I've always said to people that, my door's always open. Of course, I work in recruitment, and recruitment's a sales industry, but, I'm not the archetypal salesperson.
How would people reach you, Paul? If someone from the listeners, whether RBI or other people, how would they reach you? What's the best way to reach you?
Oh, I mean, our website. My name. Put my name into Google. I think I'm the only one that comes up generally. I know obviously there's a lot of noise on LinkedIn, but you can always find me on LinkedIn too. But no, I think I just genuinely love this sector so much, and it would honestly, truly break my heart if it fails. I don't think it will fail. I think we will pull together, but there are so many good people in this sector.
It's about the sector.
Yeah, I'm
You've
very
got
lucky.
so much to share. To be fair,
No, I'm very lucky to have found building control as a sector, and I think, as you've alluded to in your previous podcasts, you know, a lot of people fell into building control, and building control found them, and I think the vast majority feel the same. They love this sector, and they just want the very best for it.
thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.
This episode of Behind the Regs is sponsored by Plan Checker. What is Plan Checker? Plan Checker is a UK-based digital platform. It's designed to connect clients with verified building control and construction professionals, making it easier to find the right expertise at the right time for the right job. It doesn't replace building control bodies, and it doesn't carry out statutory functions. It simply creates clearer, more transparent access to professionals working across the industry. If you're a professional, a client, or part of the wider built environment sector, you can learn more or sign up at Plan Checker, which is planchecker.co.uk. Thank you.